Hello everyone, welcome back to Buried Files. Tonight, we bring you 6 deeply disturbing true trucker horror stories that will make you question what really happens on America's most isolated highways when darkness falls. These are not fictional tales, but real encounters shared by professional drivers who have spent decades navigating the loneliest stretches of interstate where civilization fades and something far more sinister takes its place. Each story has been carefully researched and verified through witness testimonials, police reports, and corroborating evidence from the trucking community itself. America's highways hold secrets that most drivers will never encounter, and perhaps that is for the best. From predatory schemes targeting vulnerable truckers to supernatural encounters that defy explanation, tonight we explore the hidden dangers that lurk beyond the reach of headlights. If you enjoy authentic horror content that exposes the terrifying reality behind closed doors, subscribe to Buried Files and hit the notification bell so you never miss our latest investigations into the darkest corners of American highways. After you listen to these chilling accounts, we want to hear from you in the comments below about your own experiences on the road or encounters with the unexplained. Now settle in as we journey into the darkness that travels alongside America's truckers. I have been hauling freight across the mountain states for 18 years, and I thought I had seen every kind of scam, every type of roadside desperation, and every variation of human greed that the interstate could throw at me. I was wrong. What happened to me on that snow-covered stretch of Wyoming highway during the blizzard of February 2019 still haunts my sleep and makes me question every stranded motorist I pass. My name is Marcus Thompson, and I drive a Peterbilt 379 pulling a 53-foot refrigerated trailer for a logistics company based out of Denver. The run that night was supposed to be routine. I was hauling frozen goods from Salt Lake City to Billings, Montana, a route I had driven countless times before. The weather forecast called for light snow, maybe 3 to 4 inches, nothing that would slow down an experienced driver like myself. But Wyoming weather has a mind of its own, and by the time I hit the stretch between Rock Springs and Rawlins, the light snow had transformed into a full-blown blizzard. The wind was howling across the open plains, creating whiteout conditions that reduced visibility to maybe 50 feet on a good stretch. My CB radio crackled with chatter from other drivers reporting jackknifed semis, cars in ditches, and road closures further north. I should have pulled over at the next truck stop and waited it out. Any sensible driver would have. But I was behind schedule, and the company had been breathing down our necks about delivery times. The customer in Billings needed those frozen foods for their morning shipment, and a delay would cost us the contract. So I pressed on, gripping the steering wheel with white knuckles as my headlights carved a narrow tunnel through the swirling snow. The highway was nearly deserted. Most smart people had found shelter hours ago, leaving only the foolish and the desperate to battle the elements. My truck crept along at 30 miles per hour, the engine working hard to maintain traction on the ice-slicked asphalt. The heater was running full blast, but the cold seemed to seep through every crack and crevice, chilling me to the bone despite my heavy winter coat. That was when I saw her. At first, she was just a shadow in the storm, a dark shape moving along the shoulder of the road. As I got closer, my headlights illuminated a young woman in a thin jacket, no hat, no gloves, waving frantically at passing vehicles. She looked to be in her early 20s, with long, dark hair whipping around her face in the wind. Even through the storm, I could see she was shivering violently, her breath creating clouds of vapor that were immediately torn away by the gale. Every instinct screamed at me to keep driving. Picking up hitchhikers was against company policy, and in weather like this, stopping could mean getting stuck myself. But as I passed her, I caught a glimpse of her face in my side mirror, She looked terrified, desperate, and hypothermic. No one deserved to die, alone on a highway in a blizzard. Company policy be damned. I pulled over about 100 yards ahead, hazard lights flashing, and watched in my mirrors as she stumbled through the snow toward my truck. She was moving slowly, her legs apparently stiff from cold, and I could see her struggling against the wind with each step. When she reached the passenger door, I leaned over and opened it from the inside. She practically fell into the cab, bringing a swirl of snow and frigid air with her. Up close, she looked even younger, maybe 19 or 20, with pale skin that had taken on a bluish tint from the cold. Her lips were purple, and her teeth were chattering so violently she could barely speak. "Thank you," she managed to gasp between chattering teeth. "Thank you so much. I thought I was going to die out there." I grabbed a spare blanket from behind my seat and wrapped it around her shoulders. "What the hell are you doing out here in this weather?" I asked, shifting the truck back into gear and pulling carefully onto the highway. "Where's your car?" She pulled the blanket tighter around herself and held her hands up to the heating vents. "It broke down about 5 miles back," she said, her voice still shaking. "The engine just died, and I couldn't get it started again. I've been walking for over an hour." "Why didn't you stay with the car? That's the first rule of winter survival. Never leave your vehicle." She shook her head, snowflakes still melting in her dark hair. "The heater stopped working when the engine died. I was getting so cold and no one was stopping. I figured if I walked, maybe I could find a gas station or flag down help." It made sense, I supposed, though it was still incredibly dangerous. Hypothermia could cloud judgment, make people do irrational things. I reached for my CB radio to call for assistance. "What's your name?" "I'll radio ahead to the state patrol, let them know about your car." "Sarah," she said quickly. "Sarah Miller. And thank you. But could we maybe wait until we get somewhere warm? I just want to get feeling back in my fingers first." Something about her response struck me as odd, but I attributed it to the stress of her situation. Hypothermia and shock could make anyone act strangely. I focused on the road ahead, fighting to keep the truck centered in the lane as crosswinds buffeted us from all sides. "Where are you headed?" I asked, making conversation to keep her alert. People with hypothermia could slip into unconsciousness if they got too comfortable. "Rollins," she said. "I have family there. They're expecting me." "Good. That's where I'm headed too. We should be there in about an hour if this weather doesn't get any worse." She nodded and settled back into the passenger seat, the blanket still wrapped tightly around her. For the next 20 minutes, we drove in relative silence, the only sounds being the rumble of the diesel engine, the whistle of wind around the cab, and the occasional squawk from the CB radio. That was when I noticed the headlights in my mirrors. At first, I thought it was just another truck or a snowplow catching up to us. But as I watched, I realized there were 3 sets of headlights maintaining a steady distance behind us. In a blizzard like this, most vehicles would either pass quickly or fall behind. These were keeping pace, staying about a quarter-mile back, just visible through the storm. I glanced over at Sarah, who seemed to be dozing fitfully in the passenger seat. Her breathing had returned to normal, and some color had come back to her cheeks. The immediate danger of hypothermia was past, but something else was bothering me now. "Sarah," I said gently, "those vehicles behind us, are they with you?" Her eyes snapped open, and for just a moment, I saw something that chilled me more than the Wyoming wind. It was a look of calculation, of predatory awareness that had nothing to do with being a stranded motorist. But it was gone so quickly, I almost convinced myself I had imagined it. "What vehicles?" she asked, turning to look in the passenger side mirror. "I don't see anything." "Those headlights, 3 sets, staying right behind us." She squinted into the storm. "I can barely see anything in this snow. Maybe it's just other people trying to get to safety, like us." Maybe. But 18 years on the road had taught me to trust my instincts, and every instinct I had was now screaming that something was wrong. I had seen this pattern before in CB radio chatter from other drivers. Coordinated vehicles following a target, waiting for the right moment to strike. I kept my voice casual. "You know, I just realized I should probably call this in to dispatch. Let them know I picked up a passenger." I reached for the CB radio again. "No!" The word came out sharper than she probably intended. She quickly softened her tone. "I mean, could we wait? I'm still feeling pretty shaky, and I'd rather not deal with official stuff right now." Red flags were going up all over my mental radar now. I had picked up stranded motorists before, and they were always grateful for any help, eager to get in touch with authorities or family members. Sarah's reluctance to involve anyone else was setting off every alarm bell I had. I glanced in my mirrors again. The 3 sets of headlights were still there, and now I was certain they were maintaining a deliberate formation. 2 were hanging back in the right lane, 1 in the left, positioned to block any attempt at escape if I tried to change lanes or exit the highway. "Sarah," I said carefully, "I need you to be honest with me. Are you really stranded? Or is this some kind of setup?" The mask dropped completely then. Her shivering stopped, her posture straightened, and when she looked at me, her eyes were cold and calculating. "You're a smart one, Marcus. Most drivers don't figure it out until it's too late." My blood turned to ice water. She knew my name. I had never told her my name. "How do you know?" "Your company puts driver names on the truck doors, genius. We've been tracking you since you left the Flying J in Rock Springs. You've got a refrigerated trailer full of expensive frozen goods, and more importantly, you're driving alone through the middle of nowhere in a blizzard." I looked ahead and realized we were approaching the exit for a rest area. If this was a coordinated robbery, that would be the perfect place for it. Isolated, off the main highway, easy to control. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. "What do you want?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Pull off at the rest area ahead. My friends will take the trailer and you'll walk away. Try to be a hero and you won't walk away at all." The CB radio crackled to life. "Breaker 19, this is Wyoming Bear. We've got multiple reports of a hijacking crew working I-80 tonight. 3 vehicles working together, using a female decoy to flag down trucks. All drivers exercise extreme caution." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "Too bad you won't be able to respond to that warning." But I was already formulating a plan. The rest area was still 2 miles ahead, and I had one advantage she didn't know about. My truck was equipped with a silent alarm system that could alert law enforcement and my dispatch office with the push of a hidden button. I had installed it myself after hearing too many horror stories from other drivers. "You know," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "you picked the wrong truck to mess with." "What's that supposed to mean?" Instead of answering, I pushed the hidden alarm button with my left hand while simultaneously flooring the accelerator with my right foot. The big Caterpillar engine roared to life, and the truck surged forward through the snow. Sarah was thrown back in her seat. "What are you doing? You'll get us both killed in this weather. Better than letting you and your friends kill me in that rest area." I grabbed the CB radio and keyed the microphone. "Mayday, mayday. This is eastbound Peterbilt mile marker 184 on I-80. I have been hijacked by a female subject and 3 chase vehicles, requesting immediate assistance. The response was immediate. Peterbilt eastbound I-80. This is Wyoming State Patrol. We have units en route to your location. Can you maintain your current speed and direction? Affirmative. I'm going to try to make it to the truck stop in Rawlins. Sarah pulled a small pistol from inside her jacket. Pull over now, or I'll put a bullet in you. I looked in my mirrors. The 3 chase vehicles had accelerated as well, and were now closing the gap rapidly. They had been caught off guard by my sudden burst of speed, but they were recovering quickly. Go ahead and shoot, I said, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. At this speed, in this weather, you'll kill us both when the truck crashes. Your friends back there won't get anything but a pile of scrap metal. She hesitated, and in that moment of uncertainty, I saw something that gave me hope. Flashing red and blue lights were approaching from ahead, barely visible through the storm, but getting brighter by the second. The Wyoming State Patrol had responded faster than I had dared hope. Sarah saw the lights too. Her face went pale, and she looked between me and the approaching police cars with growing panic. This isn't over, she snarled. Yeah, it is. The next few minutes were a blur of flashing lights, radio chatter, and controlled chaos. The state patrol vehicles had set up a roadblock just past the rest area exit, and my 3 pursuers had no choice but to stop or crash. Sarah made one last desperate attempt to escape, opening the passenger door while the truck was still moving. But the combination of speed and snow made it impossible. By the time everything was sorted out, I learned that Sarah and her crew had been responsible for at least 6 truck hijackings over the past 3 months. They had stolen over $2 million worth of cargo and had seriously injured 2 drivers who had tried to resist. The most chilling part came when the state patrol detective interviewed me at the truck stop in Rawlins. You're lucky you figured it out when you did, he said. The last driver who fell for their routine was found dead in his cab at that same rest area 3 weeks ago. They're not just thieves, Mr. Thompson. They're killers. I finished my run to Billings the next day, but I never forgot that night on the Wyoming highway. Every time I see a stranded motorist now, I call it into the authorities instead of stopping myself. The memory of Sarah's cold eyes and the calculating way she used my own compassion against me changed something fundamental about how I view the world. The highway is a dangerous place, and sometimes the greatest threats come not from the weather or mechanical failures, but from the darkness that lives in human hearts. Trust is a luxury that truck drivers can no longer afford, and that realization saddens me more than I can express. But I am alive to tell this story, and that is more than some drivers can say. You learn to trust your instincts out here, or you do not survive. That is the first lesson every trucker learns, usually the hard way. After 26 years hauling loads across 48 states, I thought my instincts were bulletproof. I thought I could spot trouble coming from miles away. What happened to me at that rest stop in East Texas proved just how wrong a man can be. My name is David Rodriguez, but everyone on the CB calls me Big Dave. I drive a 2018 Kenworth W900 with a custom paint job that cost me more than most people make in 6 months. Deep, metallic blue with silver flames running down the sides, chrome stacks that shine like mirrors, and enough LED lights to illuminate a small town. Some drivers think I am showing off, but that truck is my pride and joy, my home away from home, and the tool of my trade all rolled into one. The run that night started out routine enough. I was hauling electronics from Dallas to Jacksonville, a familiar route that I had driven probably 50 times over the years. The load was valuable, worth close to $500,000 in computer components and smartphones, which meant I had to be extra careful about where I stopped and who I talked to. Cargo thieves love electronics because they are easy to move and hard to trace. I had been driving for 9 hours straight when fatigue started setting in. The law says you can drive 11 hours before you have to take a mandatory 10-hour break, but smart drivers know not to push it that far. Tired drivers make mistakes, and mistakes on the highway can kill you. So when I saw the sign for the Pine Ridge rest area, I decided it was time to call it a night. The rest area was one of those older state-maintained facilities that Texas.com has scattered throughout the eastern part of the state. Nothing fancy, just a parking lot, some picnic tables, restrooms, and a few vending machines. It was set back about half a mile from the main highway, surrounded by thick pine forest that blocked out most of the light pollution from the road. During the day, it was probably a pleasant enough spot for travelers to stretch their legs and let their kids run around. At night, it felt isolated and vulnerable. I pulled into the truck parking section and chose a spot near the back, away from the main building but with a clear view of both entrances to the rest area. Old habits from my early days, when I was more paranoid about security. I shut down the engine, locked the doors, and climbed into the sleeper berth to grab a few hours of rest before continuing on to Jacksonville. The sleeper berth in my Kenworth is practically a small apartment. Full-size bed, television, refrigerator, microwave, even a small desk where I can do paperwork or browse the internet when I have a good signal. I had just settled in with a sandwich and was scrolling through messages on my phone when I heard it for the first time. A child screaming. It was faint at first, barely audible, over the hum of my auxiliary power unit. But it was definitely there. A high-pitched wail of terror and pain that seemed to be coming from somewhere in the woods beyond the rest area. I sat up immediately, every parental instinct I had firing at once. I have 3 kids of my own, and that sound triggered something primal in me. I opened the sleeper berth curtain and looked out the side window toward the tree line. The rest area was dimly lit by a few security lights mounted on poles around the parking lot. But beyond that, the pine forest was a wall of impenetrable darkness. The screaming continued for maybe 30 seconds, then stopped abruptly. Silence. I waited, listening intently, but heard nothing except the distant hum of highway traffic and the occasional rustle of wind through the pine branches. Maybe it had been an animal, I told myself. Foxes could make sounds that were eerily similar to human screams, especially when they were fighting or mating. But the rational part of my brain knew the difference between animal sounds and human ones. And what I had heard was definitely human. I grabbed my flashlight and cell phone and climbed down from the cab. The night air was thick with humidity and the smell of pine sap. Texas in August is never comfortable. But there was something oppressive about the atmosphere that night, like the air itself was holding its breath. I walked toward the tree line, following the direction the screams had seemed to come from. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating maybe 20 feet of forest at a time. Pine trees, undergrowth, nothing unusual. I called out, "Hello? Is someone out there? Do you need help?" No response. I walked a little deeper into the woods, sweeping my flashlight back and forth, looking for any sign of movement or distress. The forest floor was covered with a thick carpet of pine needles that muffled my footsteps, and every shadow seemed to hide potential threats. After about 10 minutes of searching, I was ready to give up and head back to my truck when I heard it again. The screaming. This time it was louder, more urgent, and it seemed to be coming from deeper in the woods. But there was something wrong with it. Something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. The scream was too consistent, too uniform. Real screams of terror vary in pitch and intensity as people run out of breath or their voices crack from strain. This sounded almost recorded. I stopped walking and listened more carefully. The scream continued for exactly 30 seconds, then cut off with an electronic click that was barely audible. Then, after a pause of maybe 10 seconds, it started again. Same pitch, same duration, same abrupt ending. It was recorded. Someone was playing a recording of a child screaming in the middle of the woods at a remote rest area at 2 o'clock in the morning. Every alarm bell in my head started going off at once. This was a trap. Someone was using that, recording to lure Good Samaritans into the woods, probably to rob them or worse. I had heard stories from other drivers about rest area predators, but I had never encountered one myself. I turned around and started walking quickly back toward the parking lot, my flashlight sweeping left and right to make sure no one was following me. The screaming continued behind me, that same 30-second loop playing over and over again. Whoever was running this operation was either very confident or very stupid to keep the recording going even after their intended victim had clearly figured out what was happening. I made it back to the parking lot and was heading for my truck when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There was a man standing next to my Kenworth, looking up at the sleeper berth windows. He was tall and thin, wearing dark clothing that made him hard to see in the dim light. When he heard my footsteps, he turned toward me. "Hey there, driver," he called out in a friendly voice that did not match the predatory way he was moving. "You hear that screaming? Sounds like some kid is in trouble out there in the woods." I kept walking toward my truck, but I was already reaching for the can of bear spray I kept clipped to my belt. "Yeah, I heard it. Already called the cops. They should be here any minute." It was a lie, but I hoped it would make him back off. Instead, he smiled, and even in the dim light, I could see that it was not a pleasant expression. "That is funny," he said, taking a step closer to me, "because my buddy out there in the woods has been watching you for the past 15 minutes, and he says you never made any phone calls." That was when I saw the second man emerging from the shadows near the restroom building. He was shorter than the first one, but broader, built like a linebacker. He had something in his hand that caught the light as he moved. A knife, maybe, or a metal pipe. I was trapped between them, about 30 feet from my truck. The keys were in my pocket, but even if I could get to the cab and get the engine started, they would be on me before I could get moving. My only advantage was that I outweighed both of them by at least 50 pounds and had been in more than my share of fights during my younger, stupider days. "Look, fellas," I said, trying to keep my voice calm and reasonable. "I do not know what you are planning here, but it is not worth it. My load is just electronics. Insurance will cover whatever you take, and I will not even report it until tomorrow. Just take what you want and let me go." The tall one laughed. "Electronics? Brother, you think this is about cargo? You have got it all wrong." The short one had moved closer, circling around to cut off my escape route toward the rest area entrance. "We are not cargo thieves, driver. We are collectors." "Collectors? We collect drivers," the tall one explained, still smiling that horrible smile. "Some we keep for a while, some we sell, some we just play with until we get bored. But they all end up the same way, eventually." The screaming in the woods had stopped, but now I could hear something else. Voices. Multiple voices coming from the direction of the trees, calling out in what sounded like distress. But just like the screaming, something about those voices was wrong. They were too clear, too distinct, like they were being amplified somehow. "Speakers," I said, understanding flooding through me. You have speakers set up in the woods, playing recordings to lure people out there. Smart man, the tall one said. Too bad smart will not help you now. That was when I made my move. Instead of going for my truck like they expected, I sprinted toward the restroom building. It was not much of a shelter, but the walls were concrete block and there might be a back exit. More importantly, it would force them to come at me from a predictable direction instead of surrounding me in the open parking lot. I almost made it. The short one was faster than he looked, and he tackled me about 10 feet from the building entrance. We went down hard on the asphalt, and I felt the skin scrape off my palms and elbows. But adrenaline is a hell of a drug, and I barely felt the pain. I rolled over and caught him with an uppercut that snapped his head back and sent him sprawling. The tall one was on me before I could get to my feet, swinging what looked like a tire iron at my head. I got my arm up just in time to block the blow, but the impact sent lightning bolts of pain up to my shoulder. He raised the tire iron for another swing, and I knew that this one would probably finish me. That was when the real screaming started. Not from speakers hidden in the woods, but from the tall man himself. He dropped the tire iron and clutched at his face, blood streaming between his fingers. Behind him, I could see a third figure. Someone I had not noticed before. It was another trucker, a woman with graying hair and forearms like tree trunks. She was holding what looked like a modified cattle prod, sparks still dancing between the electrodes. Texas Ranger, she announced in a voice that carried the authority of someone used to being obeyed. Y'all gentlemen are under arrest. The next hour was a blur of police cars, ambulances, and crime scene technicians. It turned out that the woman who had saved me was Detective Linda Martinez, working undercover as part of a multi-state task force investigating rest area attacks. She had been tracking this particular crew for over 6 months, following a trail of missing truckers and unsolved murders across 4 states. The speakers in the woods were exactly what I had suspected. High-powered amplifiers connected to digital players loaded with recordings of people in distress. The 2 men had been using them to lure victims into isolated areas where they could be more easily controlled. What they did to their victims after that was something Detective Martinez would not discuss in detail. But her expression told me everything I needed to know. "You are lucky you figured out it was a recording," she told me as the paramedics checked out my injuries. Most people do not. They hear a child in distress, and every decent instinct they have drives them straight into the trap. How many drivers have they killed? Her face went grim. We have confirmed 7 victims so far, but we suspect the number is much higher. These guys have been operating for at least 3 years, maybe longer. 7 drivers, 7 people who had just been trying to help someone they thought was in trouble, and it had cost them their lives. The thought made me sick to my stomach. I gave my statement to the investigators and finally got back on the road around dawn. The electronics made it to Jacksonville on schedule, and the company was so grateful that they gave me a bonus and 3 days of paid time off. But I could not stop thinking about what had happened at that rest area. The worst part was not the physical danger or even the knowledge of how close I had come to becoming victim number 8. It was the realization of how these predators operated, how they turned our best instincts against us. They knew that most truckers are decent people who will try to help someone in trouble, and they weaponized that decency. Now, whenever I stop at a rest area, I listen carefully to the night sounds around me. If I hear screaming or calls for help, I do not go investigate. I call 911 and let the professionals handle it. It goes against every instinct I have as a father and a human being. But Detective Martinez was right. Sometimes the sounds of people in distress are exactly that. And sometimes they are the bait in a trap designed by monsters. The highway is full of predators who know exactly how to exploit our humanity, and the price of compassion can be higher than anyone should have to pay. I learned that lesson at a rest stop in East Texas, and it is one I will never forget. In 23 years of driving, I thought I had seen every kind of cargo. From live animals to hazardous chemicals, from precious artwork to military equipment. I had hauled everything from wedding dresses to coffins, and nothing had ever bothered me enough to lose sleep over it. I was wrong about that. What I discovered in the back of my refrigerated trailer during that cross-country run from Atlanta to Seattle still wakes me up in the middle of the night, sweating and checking the locks on my doors. My name is Patricia Williams, but everyone calls me Patty. I've been driving big rigs since I was 25 years old, back when women truckers were rare enough to cause stares at every truck stop. I started driving because my husband walked out on me and our 2 kids, leaving me with nothing but bills and a high school education. Trucking offered good money for someone willing to work hard and spend weeks away from home, so I got my CDL and never looked back. I drive a 2220 Freightliner Cascadia, pulling a 53-foot refrigerated trailer, and I specialize in temperature-controlled loads. Pharmaceuticals, frozen foods, flowers, anything that needs to stay cold during transport. It is more complicated than dry van work, but it pays better, and after 2 decades on the road, I can handle any temperature-sensitive cargo you throw at me. The load that changed everything came through my dispatcher on a Tuesday morning in October. The pickup was at a pharmaceutical distribution center just outside Atlanta, and the destination was a medical research facility in Seattle. The shipping papers listed the cargo as biological specimens with a required temperature of -20 degrees Fahrenheit. Nothing unusual about that. I had hauled similar loads dozens of times before. What was unusual was the security. When I arrived at the pickup facility, there were 3 men in dark suits waiting for me, and they insisted on supervising the entire loading process personally. They had federal identification, CDC badges that looked legitimate, and they spoke with the kind of authority that made you not want to ask too many questions. The loading took place in a secure warehouse bay with no windows. The cargo consisted of approximately 50 stainless steel containers, each about the size of a large cooler, labeled with biohazard symbols and serial numbers. Each container was sealed with what looked like medical tape and locked with heavy-duty padlocks. The suits refused to tell me exactly what was inside, citing national security and trade secrets. But they assured me it was completely safe as long as the containers remained sealed and frozen. "Whatever you do," one of them told me as I signed the paperwork, "do not open these containers under any circumstances. If there is any problem with temperature control or if any of the seals are broken, contact us immediately." He handed me a business card with nothing but a phone number on it. "This is a matter of national importance, Miss Williams. Lives depend on these specimens reaching their destination intact." I had heard similar speeches before from clients shipping everything from experimental drugs to genetically modified seeds. Everyone thinks their cargo is the most important thing on the road. But there was something in his tone, something in the way all 3 men kept watching me, that made this feel different, more serious, more dangerous. The drive from Atlanta to Seattle normally takes about 42 hours of actual driving time, spread over 4 or 5 days with mandatory rest breaks. I plan to take my usual route through Birmingham, Little Rock, Oklahoma City, Amarillo, Albuquerque, Flagstaff, Las Vegas, and finally up through California and Oregon to Washington. It was a route I had driven probably 100 times, and I knew every truck stop, way station, and rest area along the way. For the first 2 days, everything went smoothly. The refrigeration unit maintained a steady minus 20 degrees, and the cargo remained secure and undisturbed. I made my scheduled stops, grabbed meals and showers, and logged my hours according to federal regulations. The only unusual thing was that twice I noticed the same black sedan following me at a distance, but I attributed that to coincidence or paranoia. It was on the third day, somewhere between Flagstaff and Las Vegas, that the refrigeration unit started acting up. I first noticed the problem when I stopped for fuel at a truck stop outside Kingman, Arizona. The temperature gauge on my dashboard was reading minus 15 instead of minus 20, and there was a yellow warning light indicating a possible compressor issue. 5 degrees might not sound like much, but when you are hauling temperature-critical cargo, even small variations can mean the difference between a successful delivery and a total loss. I called the emergency number the suits had given me, but it went straight to voicemail. I left a detailed message explaining the situation and continued driving, hoping the system would stabilize. But over the next 100 miles, the temperature continued to rise. Minus 10, minus 5, 0 degrees. The yellow warning light turned red, and I could hear the compressors cycling on and off erratically. By the time I reached Las Vegas, the trailer temperature was holding steady at 10 degrees above zero. Still well below freezing, but nowhere near the minus 20 the cargo required. I found a truck stop with a repair bay and had a mechanic take a look at the system. "Looks like your compressor is shot," he told me after an hour of diagnostics. "I can get you a replacement, but it will take at least 12 hours to get the part and install it. Maybe longer if we run into complications." 12 hours. The cargo had already been above its required temperature for 6 hours. Another 12 would mean 18 hours total, and I had no idea how long the biological specimens could survive those conditions. I tried the emergency number again. Still no answer. That was when I made the decision that I now wish I could take back. I decided to check the cargo myself. I backed the trailer up to the loading dock and opened the rear doors. The interior was still cold enough that my breath formed clouds in the air, but it was definitely warmer than it should have been. The stainless steel containers were arranged on pallets, just as they had been loaded in Atlanta. But something was different. Several of the containers had condensation on them, indicating temperature fluctuations. More troubling, I could see that some of the medical tape seals had started to come loose. Not completely torn, but peeling around the edges where moisture had compromised the adhesive. I knew I should not open any of the containers. The men in suits had been very clear about that. But I also knew that if the cargo was compromised, I needed to document the extent of the damage for insurance purposes. And if whatever was inside was truly dangerous, I needed to know what I was dealing with. I chose one of the containers with a partially loose seal and carefully removed the medical tape. The padlock was still secure, but I had bolt cutters in my toolkit for situations just like this. The lock snapped with a metallic crack that echoed through the trailer. I lifted the lid and immediately wished I had not. Inside the container, packed in what looked like dry ice, was a human torso. No head, no arms, no legs. Just a torso. Gray, white, and obviously frozen, with surgical incision marks along the chest and abdomen. There was a plastic tag attached to one of the incision sites with a number that matched the serial number on the outside of the container. I stumbled backward, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. This was not biological specimens for medical research. This was human remains, body parts, transported without proper documentation or permits. And judging by the surgical precision of the cuts, these were not accident victims or natural deaths. My hands shaking, I opened another container. A pair of human arms, severed at the shoulders with the same surgical precision. Another plastic tag, another serial number. A third container held internal organs. Heart, liver, kidneys, all carefully preserved and labeled. A fourth contained human heads, 3 of them, with the eyes and mouths sewn shut with black thread. I had stumbled onto something horrific, something that went far beyond simple cargo theft or insurance fraud. Someone was using my truck to transport human remains, body parts that had almost certainly been obtained through illegal means. And judging by the surgical quality of the dismemberment, whoever was doing this had medical training. I was about to call the police when I heard voices outside the trailer. The same voices I had heard back in Atlanta. The men in suits had found me. "Miss Williams," one of them, called out, "Step away from the cargo and come outside. We need to talk." I looked around the trailer desperately, searching for another exit. But there was only one way out, and they were blocking it. I could hear at least 3 different voices, maybe more. They knew I had seen the contents of the containers, and they were not going to let me walk away with that knowledge. "Miss Williams, we know you opened the containers. That was very unwise. Come outside so we can discuss your options." Options. That did not sound like they were planning to arrest me or call the authorities. That sounded like they were planning something much worse. I pulled out my cell phone and dialed 911, but there was no signal inside the metal trailer. I would have to get outside to make a call, and that meant walking into their trap. But staying inside was not an option either. They could simply wait me out, or worse. I grabbed the heaviest tool I could find in my kit, a large adjustable wrench, and moved toward the trailer doors. If I was going down, I was not going down without a fight. But when I looked outside, the loading dock was empty. No men in suits, no black sedan, nothing. Just the normal bustle of a busy truck stop at midday. Had I imagined the voices? Was the stress of discovering the body parts making me paranoid? I jumped down from the trailer and looked around cautiously. There were other drivers refueling their trucks, customers going in and out of the convenience store, mechanics working in the repair bays. Everything looked completely normal. Too normal. I walked around to the front of my truck and found a note tucked under the windshield wiper. It was typed on plain white paper with no letterhead or identifying marks. "Miss Williams, you have seen something you were not supposed to see. For your own safety and the safety of your family, you will complete this delivery as originally planned. You will not contact law enforcement. You will not discuss this cargo with anyone. When you reach Seattle, you will be given further instructions. Your cooperation ensures that this remains a business transaction rather than a personal matter." At the bottom of the note were 2 photographs. One showed my daughter coming out of her apartment in Phoenix. The other showed my son leaving his job at a construction company in Denver. Both photos had been taken recently, probably within the last few days. The message was clear: complete the delivery or my children would pay the price. I drove to Seattle in a state of controlled terror, my mind racing with possibilities and scenarios. Who were these people? How had they found my children so quickly? What kind of operation was I caught up in? The delivery went exactly as planned. A different set of men met me at the research facility, and they unloaded the cargo with the same careful precision that had been used in Atlanta. They inspected every container, noted the few that I had opened, and made check marks on their clipboards. "Thank you for your cooperation, Miss Williams. one of them said as I prepared to leave. "Your discretion in this matter is appreciated. You will find a performance bonus has been added to your payment." And that was it. I drove home to my base in Oklahoma, collected my pay, and tried to pretend that the whole thing had been a nightmare. But I knew it was not over. People who transport human remains without permits, people who threaten families to ensure silence, do not just disappear after one successful transaction. 6 months later, I received another call from the same dispatcher. Same pickup location, same destination, same cargo description. When I declined the load, citing equipment problems, my truck started having mysterious mechanical failures. Brakes that would not hold, tires that developed slow leaks, electrical systems that malfunctioned at dangerous moments. I got the message. I took the next load, and the one after that, and the one after that. Each time, I transported more human remains across the country, each time wondering who these people had been and how they had died. I am still driving those loads today. I do not have a choice. The alternative is too terrible to contemplate. But I want people to know that there are things moving on America's highways that should not exist. Cargo that represents the darkest side of human nature. Sometimes, the most dangerous thing in your trailer is not what the shipping papers say it is. The CB radio went dead quiet at 2:47 a.m., and that is when I knew something was terribly wrong. In 31 years of driving these highways, I have learned that truckers never stop talking on the radio, especially during the long, lonely hours before dawn. We tell jokes, share road conditions, warn each other about speed traps and way stations. The CB chatter is our lifeline, our connection to humanity when we are alone in the dark with nothing but miles of empty asphalt stretching ahead of us. But that night, as I was driving eastbound on Interstate 94 through the desolate stretch of Montana between Billings and Miles City, the radio fell completely silent. Not just quiet, but dead silent. Like every trucker within a 100-mile radius had suddenly vanished or stopped breathing. My name is James Mitchell, and I have been hauling freight across the northern states since I was 22 years old. I drive a 2017 Kenworth T680 with a sleeper cab, pulling whatever loads my dispatcher can find. Grain from North Dakota, lumber from Minnesota, manufactured goods from Chicago back to the West Coast. It is not glamorous work, but it pays the bills and gives me the freedom to be my own boss on the road. That particular run started in Fargo, North Dakota, where I had picked up a load of agricultural equipment bound for a farming cooperative in Spokane, Washington. Heavy machinery, combines and tractors, nothing unusual or particularly valuable. The kind of load that insurance companies do not worry about and cargo thieves usually ignore. The weather was typical for late October in Montana. Clear skies, no precipitation, but cold enough that I could see my breath when I stepped out of the cab. The forecast called for possible fog later in the night as the temperature dropped, but nothing that would slow down an experienced driver. I had been on the road for about 6 hours when I stopped for fuel and a meal at a truck stop outside Billings. The place was busy, probably 15 or 20 other trucks parked in the lot. Drivers grabbing showers, catching up on sleep, or just stretching their legs before continuing their runs. Normal truck stop atmosphere, familiar faces, and friendly conversations. That was where I first heard mention of the Phantom Convoy. I was sitting at the counter in the restaurant, working on a plate of meatloaf and mashed potatoes, when an older driver at the next stool started talking to the waitress about something strange he had seen the night before. "Damnedest thing I ever witnessed," he was saying, shaking his head as he stirred sugar into his coffee. I was running eastbound on this same stretch of 94, maybe 2 in the morning, when I saw them in my mirrors. 3 trucks running together, no lights except their running lights, keeping perfect formation about a quarter mile behind me. The waitress, a woman in her 50s, who had probably heard every trucker story ever told, raised an eyebrow. No headlights. How? Were they seeing the road? That is the thing, the driver continued. It was clear as day, full moon, but still. You do not run dark like that unless you're up to something illegal. So I got on the CB, tried to raise them, see what their story was. Nothing. Dead silence. Like they were not even there. Maybe they had their radios turned off, the waitress suggested. The driver shook his head. No, that is not the weird part. The weird part is, when I slowed down to let them pass, they slowed down too. When I sped up, they matched my speed exactly, always staying that same distance behind me, like they were tethered to my truck somehow. He took a long sip of his coffee before continuing. Finally, I pulled off at a rest area, figured I would get a look at them when they passed. But they never did. I sat there for 20 minutes, watched the highway, and never saw those 3 trucks go by. It was like they just disappeared into thin air. I listened to this story with the kind of polite skepticism that experienced drivers develop over the years. Every truck stop has its share of tall tales and urban legends, stories that grow more elaborate with each telling. Phantom hitchhikers, mysterious lights in the sky, trucks that appear and disappear without explanation. Most of it is just loneliness and fatigue playing tricks on tired minds. But something about the way this old driver told his story, the genuine confusion and uneasiness in his voice, made me pay attention. He was not trying to entertain anyone or impress the waitress. He was genuinely troubled by what he had experienced. I finished my meal, topped off my fuel tank, and got back on the road around midnight. The highway was largely empty, which was normal for that time of night on that particular stretch. Most of the long-haul traffic ran during daylight hours when visibility was better and services were available. The few trucks I encountered were spaced far apart, brief glimpses of red taillights or white headlights in the distance. For the first hour, everything was normal. My CB radio crackled with the usual late-night chatter. Drivers checking in with each other, sharing information about road conditions, complaining about dispatchers and customers. The familiar background noise of the trucking community going about its business. That was when the fog started rolling in. At first, it was just wisps of vapor rising from the valleys and low-lying areas along the highway. But within 30 minutes, it had thickened into a dense blanket that reduced visibility to maybe 50 yards. I slowed down to 45 miles per hour and turned on my fog lights. But the golden beams seemed to be swallowed up by the gray-white wall surrounding my truck. Fog is dangerous for truckers. It conceals obstacles, makes it impossible to judge distances accurately, and can turn a routine drive into a white-knuckle experience. But I had driven through worse conditions before, and I was confident in my ability to handle it safely. That was when the CB radio went silent. Not gradually, like drivers signing off one by one as they reached their destinations. All at once, like someone had thrown a switch and cut off every transmission within range. I tried keying my microphone, calling out on channel 19, but got no response. I switched to other channels, tried the emergency frequency, even attempted to raise the local base stations. Nothing but static. I was checking my radio connections when I saw them in my mirrors. 3 trucks, running in perfect formation about a quarter mile behind me, just like the old driver had described. Even through the fog, I could make out their shapes. They appeared to be conventional tractors pulling standard trailers, but something about their silhouettes looked wrong. Too angular, too sharp, like they had been drawn by someone who had never actually seen a truck before. And they were running completely dark, No headlights, no marker lights, no identification numbers or company logos visible on their sides. Just dark shapes moving through the fog at exactly the same speed I was traveling, maintaining that precise distance behind me, no matter how I varied my speed. I tried the CB radio again. Breaker 19, this is eastbound Kenworth mile marker 126 on I-94. I have 3 trucks following me with no lights. Please identify yourselves. Silence. I slowed down to 35 miles per hour, expecting them to pass me or at least close the distance. Instead, they slowed down too, maintaining that same quarter-mile gap. I sped up to 55, pushing the safe limits for the fog conditions. They matched my speed exactly. For the next 20 miles, this bizarre procession continued. Me in front, struggling to see the road through the thickening fog, and 3 phantom trucks behind me, somehow navigating without any visible means of illumination. Every few minutes, I would try the CB radio again, hoping to reach someone, anyone, who could explain what was happening. But the airwaves remained dead. That was when I started noticing other details that made my skin crawl. The trucks behind me were not leaving tire tracks in the thin layer of moisture that had accumulated on the asphalt. I could see my own tracks clearly in my side mirrors, dark lines following the path of my tires. But behind them, the road surface looked undisturbed, as if the 3 trucks were floating just above the pavement. More unsettling, they cast no shadows. Even in the fog, with my running lights and reflectors creating pools of illumination, objects cast shadows. But these trucks seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Dark voids moving through the gray landscape like holes cut out of reality itself. I was beginning to seriously question my sanity when I saw the exit sign for a rest area 5 miles ahead. I decided to pull off and see what would happen. If these were real trucks with real drivers, they would have to either pass me or follow me into the rest area. If they were some kind of hallucination brought on by fatigue and stress, stopping for a break might clear my head. I took the exit slowly, watching my mirrors constantly. The 3 trucks followed me down the off-ramp, maintaining their formation and distance. But as I pulled into the rest area parking lot, something impossible happened. They kept going, not past the rest area on the highway, but straight through it. I watched in my mirrors as all 3 trucks drove directly through the parking lot, through the building, through the trees on the far side, and disappeared into the fog beyond. No change in speed, no deviation from their path, just a smooth, uninterrupted journey through solid objects as if they were not there. I sat in my truck for almost an hour, engine running, heater on full blast, trying to process what I had just witnessed. Every rational part of my mind insisted that I had imagined it, that the fog and isolation had played tricks on my perception. But I knew what I had seen, and I knew it was not normal. When I finally got back on the highway, the fog was beginning to lift, and the CB radio crackled back to life. Drivers were checking in, reporting their positions, resuming the normal chatter that had been absent for the past 2 hours. I tried several times to tell other drivers what I had experienced, but every time I keyed the microphone, the words stuck in my throat. Who would believe such a story? Hell, I was not sure I believed it myself. I completed my run to Spokane without any further incidents, delivered the agricultural equipment on schedule, and tried to put the whole experience behind me. But over the next few weeks, I started hearing similar stories from other drivers. Always the same details. 3 trucks running dark, perfect formation, following other vehicles through remote stretches of highway, then disappearing without explanation. The stories were always from the same general area, that desolate stretch of Montana between Billings and the North Dakota border. And they were always during fog conditions, always in the early morning hours, always when the CB radio went mysteriously silent. I started avoiding that route when possible, taking longer paths through Wyoming or South Dakota to reach my destinations. But the trucking industry is small, and sometimes you do not have a choice about which roads you take. 3 months later, I found myself on that same stretch of I-94, hauling a load of electronics from Minneapolis to Seattle. It was a clear night, no fog, and I was feeling confident that whatever I had experienced before was a one-time occurrence. The CB radio was active with normal traffic, and I was making good time. But at exactly 2:47 a.m., the radio went silent again. I looked in my mirrors and saw them immediately. 3 trucks, running dark, maintaining that perfect quarter-mile distance. This time, there was no fog to blame, no atmospheric conditions to explain away what I was seeing. Just 3 impossible vehicles following me through the Montana darkness. But now, I understood something that I had missed during my first encounter. These were not living drivers playing some elaborate prank or engaging in illegal activity. These were the ghosts of truckers who had died on this stretch of highway, condemned to drive the same route for eternity. I have researched the accident records for that area, and the statistics are sobering. Over the past 30 years, dozens of truckers have been killed in crashes along that section of I-94. Jackknifed semis, rollovers, collisions with wildlife, mechanical failures that led to fatal accidents. Many of the victims were driving in convoys, following each other too closely through dangerous conditions. Now they continue their journey. 3 drivers who died together and refused to rest. They follow the living, perhaps trying to warn us of the dangers ahead, or perhaps simply unable to break free from the route that claimed their lives. I still see them sometimes, on clear nights when the highway is empty and the CB radio falls silent. 3 phantom trucks in my mirrors, forever following, forever traveling a road that leads nowhere but deeper into the darkness. And every time I see them, I remember that the highway is more than just asphalt and steel. It is a repository of memories, a graveyard of dreams, and sometimes a prison for the dead who cannot let go. The road never forgets, and neither do those who died on it. After 30 years on the road, you develop a 6th sense about people. You learn to read body language, to spot trouble before it spots you, to trust your instincts when something feels wrong. That ability has saved my life more times than I can count, but it failed me completely at a truck stop outside Montgomery, Alabama, on a humid night in July that I will never forget. My name is Anthony Kowalski, but everyone calls me Tony. I have been driving long-haul routes across the southeastern states since I was 23 years old. Back when CB radios were the only way to communicate with other drivers, and truck stops were small family-owned operations that knew every regular customer by name. I drive a 2019 Peterbilt 389 with a custom paint job that cost me more than some people make in a year. Midnight black with silver pinstripes, chrome exhaust stacks that shine like mirrors, and enough LED lights to illuminate a football stadium. Some people think it is too flashy, but after 3 decades of living on the road, my truck is the only home I have ever really known. That particular run started in Jacksonville, Florida, where I had picked up a load of paper products bound for a distribution center in Nashville, Tennessee. It was routine cargo, nothing valuable enough to attract cargo thieves, and the route was one I had driven probably 50 times over the years. Familiar truck stops, predictable traffic patterns, no surprises expected. I had been driving for about 8 hours when I stopped for fuel at the Dixie Travel Plaza, a mid-sized truck stop about 30 miles south of Montgomery. The place had been there for at least 15 years, and I had stopped there dozens of times before. Clean restrooms, decent food, and a repair shop that could handle most mechanical problems. The kind of establishment that long-haul drivers depend on. The fuel islands were busy, which was normal for that time of evening. Drivers were topping off their tanks, grabbing showers, and settling in for mandatory rest periods. I pulled up to pump number 7 and started the refueling process, a routine I had performed thousands of times before. That was when I met Eddie. He appeared beside my truck while I was cleaning my windshield, a thin man in his 40s wearing greasy coveralls and a friendly smile. He had the kind of face that blended into crowds, unremarkable except for his eyes, which seemed to take in every detail of my truck and equipment. "Nice rig," he said, running his hand along the polished chrome bumper. "Peterbilt 389, right? These are beautiful machines when they are maintained properly." I nodded, continuing to work on the windshield. Small talk from other truckers was normal at fuel stops, part of the informal community that existed among drivers. But something about Eddie made me uncomfortable. Maybe it was the way his eyes lingered on the expensive chrome accessories, calculating their value. Maybe it was how he stood just a little too close, invading my personal space in a way that experienced drivers usually avoided. "You haul this route regular?" he asked, leaning against the fuel pump. "I work in the repair shop here, and I swear I have seen this truck before." "Yeah, I come through here every few weeks," I replied, finishing the windshield and moving to check my tire pressure. "Good stop. Never had any problems." Eddie smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. "That is what we like to hear. Customer satisfaction is our top priority." He paused, seeming to study my face. "You know, I was just thinking. That front tire looks a little low to me. Maybe you should bring the truck around to the shop. Let me take a proper look. No charge for the inspection." I glanced at the tire he was indicating. It looked fine to me, holding pressure normally with no visible wear or damage. But Eddie was the professional mechanic, and tire problems could be dangerous at highway speeds. Against my better judgment, I agreed to let him take a look. "Great," he said, his smile widening. "Just pull around to bay number 3. I will meet you there in a few minutes." I finished fueling, paid for the diesel, and drove around to the repair shop. Bay number 3 was at the far end of the building, separated from the main truck stop by a row of empty trailers and construction equipment. The area was poorly lit, with only a few security lights casting long shadows across the cracked asphalt. Eddie was waiting for me, along with another man I had not seen before. This second man was larger, built like a linebacker, with arms covered in tattoos and the kind of dead eyes that I had learned to associate with serious trouble. He was holding what looked like a heavy wrench, but the way he gripped it suggested it was not intended for mechanical work. "Just pull right up here," Eddie called out, waving me forward. "We will have you back on the road in no time." Every alarm bell in my head started going off at once. The isolated location, the second man with the weapon, the overly friendly mechanic who had been asking too many questions about my route and schedule. This was not a tire inspection. This was a setup. I stopped the truck about 20 feet from the bay and set the air brakes, but I kept the engine running. "Actually," I called through the driver's side window, "the tire looks fine to me now. I think I will just head on down the road." Eddie's friendly mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and predatory underneath. "Come on, friend. You are already here? Let me at least take a quick look." Professional courtesy. The big man with the wrench had moved to block the exit from the bay area. He was not being subtle about it, just standing there with his arms crossed, making it clear that I was not going anywhere until they were finished with whatever they had planned. But 30 years of driving had taught me more than just how to handle an 18-wheeler. I had learned to think fast under pressure, to assess situations quickly, and to take decisive action when my life was on the line. Instead of getting out of the truck like they expected, I released the air brakes and floored the accelerator. The big Caterpillar engine roared to life, and 40 tons of truck and trailer lurched forward toward the exit. The big man dove out of the way just in time to avoid being crushed, rolling across the asphalt and shouting curses. Eddie was screaming something behind me, but I could not make out the words over the sound of the engine. I did not care what he was saying. I just wanted to put as much distance as possible between myself and that truck stop. I made it about 5 miles down the highway before I pulled over and called the police. When I explained what had happened, the dispatcher told me that they had been investigating a string of attacks on truck drivers in that area. Drivers who had stopped for fuel or repairs and then disappeared. Their trucks found days later, stripped of cargo and expensive accessories. "You are lucky you trusted your instincts," the detective who interviewed me later said. Eddie Morrison has been running that operation for at least 2 years. We think he and his partner have killed at least 6 drivers, maybe more. 6 drivers. 6 men who had just been trying to do their jobs, to earn a living on the road, and they had walked into a trap disguised as friendly assistants. The thought made me sick to my stomach. The investigation revealed that Eddie had been working at the truck stop legitimately for several months, establishing a cover identity and identifying potential victims. He would target drivers with expensive trucks or valuable cargo, lure them to the isolated repair bay, and then he and his partner would rob and kill them. The bodies were disposed of in a remote swamp about 50 miles away, while the trucks were taken to a chop shop and stripped for parts. Eddie Morrison was eventually sentenced to death for his crimes. His partner, a man named Dale Hutchins, received life in prison without the possibility of parole. The truck stop was sold to new owners who completely renovated the facility and hired an entirely new staff. But the damage was done. Every time I pull into a truck stop now, I remember Eddie's friendly smile and calculating eyes. I remember how close I came to becoming just another statistic, another driver who trusted the wrong person at the wrong time. The highway is full of predators who know exactly how to exploit the trust that exists in the trucking community. They know that drivers are more likely to help each other, to accept offers of assistance from people wearing mechanics' coveralls or truck stop uniforms. They weaponize our professional courtesy and use it against us. I still stop at truck stops, of course. I have to. But I am more careful now, more suspicious of unsolicited offers to help, more aware of my surroundings when I am in isolated areas. The paranoia is exhausting, but it is the price of survival on America's highways. Eddie Morrison taught me that the most dangerous predators are not the ones who look threatening. They are the ones who look helpful, who offer exactly what you need at exactly the right moment. They are the ones who smile while they are planning to kill you. The road is a dangerous place, and sometimes the people who claim to want to help you are the ones you should fear the most. The dispatcher's voice was different that night. Too calm for a rush delivery, too smooth for someone calling in a favor at 3 in the morning. After 28 years of hauling loads across the western states, I should have recognized the warning signs. I should have asked more questions. But the money was too good, and I needed every dollar I could get to keep my rig running. My name is Samuel Washington, but everyone calls me Sam. I have been driving big rigs since I was 24 years old. working my way up from company driver to owner-operator to running my own small fleet. These days, I drive a 2021 Freightliner Cascadia with a custom sleeper berth that serves as my home more often than the apartment I rent in Oakland. The call came in at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in September. I was parked at a truck stop outside Bakersfield, catching up on my mandatory rest hours between loads, when my phone rang with a number I did not recognize. "Mr. Washington, this is dispatch for Meridian Logistics. We have an urgent load that needs to move tonight. Are you available for immediate pickup?" Meridian Logistics was a company I had never heard of, but that was not unusual in the trucking industry. Freight brokers and logistics companies appeared and disappeared constantly, and most legitimate drivers worked with dozens of different companies over the course of a year. "What kind of load?" I asked, sitting up in my sleeper berth and reaching for my logbook. "And what's the rate?" "Specialized cargo, temperature controlled. Pickup in Riverside with delivery to a research facility outside Las Vegas. The rate is $8,000 for a same-day delivery." $8,000 for a 400-mile run was more than double the normal rate for that route. In trucking, when someone offers that kind of money for a routine haul, there is usually something wrong with the cargo, the customer, or the situation. But I had truck payments due and my insurance premium was coming up, so I agreed to take the load. "Great," the dispatcher said. "The pickup address is 1247 Industrial Boulevard in Riverside. Ask for Mr. Chen at the loading dock. He will have all the paperwork ready." The address led me to an unmarked warehouse in an industrial district that looked like it had seen better days. No company signs, no loading dock numbers, just a plain metal building surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with razor wire. The kind of place that processed cargo but did not want anyone to know what kind. Mr. Chen was waiting for me at the loading dock, along with two other men in matching gray coveralls. They moved with military precision, checking my identification, inspecting my trailer, and supervising the loading process with an attention to detail that seemed excessive for whatever I was hauling. The cargo consisted of 12 large containers, each about the size of a refrigerator, marked only with alphanumeric codes and biohazard symbols. They were sealed with what looked like military-grade locks and connected to a sophisticated temperature control system that maintained a steady 38 degrees Fahrenheit. "What exactly am I hauling?" I asked Mr. Chen as we completed the paperwork. "Biological specimens," he replied without looking up from his clipboard. "Medical research materials that need to reach the destination facility within 18 hours. The temperature must remain constant, and the containers cannot be opened under any circumstances." I had hauled biological specimens before, everything from laboratory animals to human organs for transplant. It was specialized work that paid well, but it required careful handling and strict adherence to transportation protocols. Nothing about this load seemed unusual, except for the secrecy and the urgency. The delivery address was equally anonymous. A coordinates location in the Nevada desert, about 50 miles northwest of Las Vegas. No street address, no facility name, just GPS coordinates that led to what appeared to be an abandoned military installation. I made good time through the night, following Interstate 15 through the Mojave Desert, while the temperature control system hummed quietly behind me. The containers remained stable, the locks intact, and the monitoring equipment showed no problems with the cargo. It was not until I reached the delivery location that I realized something was seriously wrong. The GPS coordinates led me to a heavily guarded compound surrounded by high fences and security towers. Armed guards checked my identification and directed me to a loading dock inside the perimeter. But what I saw there made my blood run cold. The facility was not a research laboratory or medical center. It was some kind of processing plant, with industrial equipment that looked designed for manufacturing rather than scientific research. And the people working there were not wearing lab coats or medical scrubs. They were wearing robes, long dark robes with symbols embroidered on the chest, moving between the machinery with ritualistic precision. Some were chanting in a language I did not recognize, while others arranged objects on what looked like altars positioned throughout the facility. I wanted to turn around and leave, but armed guards had positioned themselves around my truck, making it clear that departure was not an option. The unloading process began immediately, with robed figures carefully removing each container from my trailer and carrying it to different stations within the facility. That was when I saw what they were doing with the cargo. The containers held human organs, but not the kind used for medical transplants. These were prepared for some other purpose, arranged on metal tables surrounded by candles and ritual implements. The robed figures were performing some kind of ceremony over each organ, chanting and making gestures that looked more like worship than science. I had stumbled into the middle of something that went far beyond illegal organ trafficking. This was a cult that used human body parts for ritualistic purposes, and they had been using my truck to transport their materials without my knowledge. "Mr. Washington," a voice said behind me. I turned to see a tall man in an elaborate robe approaching, flanked by 2 guards. "Thank you for your service to our organization. Your discretion in this matter is essential." "I want to leave," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I delivered your cargo. Now I want to go." The robed man smiled, but it was not a reassuring expression. "I am afraid that is not possible. You have seen too much of our operation to simply walk away. But we have a proposition for you." He gestured toward the loading dock, where I could see other trucks parked in the shadows. "We have need of reliable drivers who can transport our materials without asking uncomfortable questions. The compensation is generous and the work is steady." "What if I refuse?" His smile faded. "Then you will become part of our research program. Your organs are in excellent condition for someone your age." The threat was clear: join their operation or become their next victim. I looked around the facility, counting guards and exit routes, trying to calculate my chances of escape. But there were too many armed men, too many obstacles between me and freedom. "What exactly would I be hauling?" I asked, buying time while I considered my options. "Biological materials, as tonight. Sometimes from hospitals and morgues that cooperate with our research. Sometimes from more informal sources. The origin of the specimens is not your concern. Your job is simply transportation." He was describing a network of organ theft and ritual murder that stretched across multiple states, using legitimate trucking companies and unwitting drivers to move their materials. And now they wanted me to become a willing participant in their operation. That was when I made the decision that probably saved my life. Instead of refusing outright or trying to argue, I pretended to consider their offer seriously. "The money would have to be substantial," I said, "and I would need guarantees about my safety and the safety of my equipment." The robed man nodded approvingly. "Of course. We are reasonable people, Mr. Washington. We understand that this arrangement must be mutually beneficial." Over the next hour, he outlined the details of their operation while I memorized every piece of information I could gather. Names, locations, schedules, the scope of their activities. They had corrupted employees at hospitals and medical facilities across 6 states, stealing organs and bodies that were supposed to be cremated or buried. The ritual purpose of these materials was something I did not want to understand, but it clearly involved human sacrifice on a scale that defied comprehension. When they finally released me with instructions to await their next call, I drove straight to the nearest FBI field office and reported everything I had witnessed. The investigation that followed lasted 18 months and resulted in the arrest of over 60 people involved in what prosecutors called the largest ritual murder conspiracy in American history. The facility in Nevada was raided 3 days after my report, but the leaders of the cult had already disappeared. Some of the lower-level participants were convicted and sentenced to life in prison, but the core organizers were never found. I learned later that they had been using dozens of drivers like me, truckers who thought they were hauling legitimate medical cargo, but were actually transporting materials for ritual murder. Most of the other drivers never discovered the truth about their loads, but a few who asked too many questions or witnessed too much simply disappeared. The trucking company that had originally hired me, Meridian Logistics, turned out to be a front operation run by the cult to recruit unwitting drivers. The real dispatcher I had spoken to was one of their members, using a fake identity and stolen credentials to access the freight networks that legitimate truckers depend on. I still drive the highways of the American West, but I am much more careful about the loads I accept and the companies I work with. I verify credentials, research unfamiliar clients, and trust my instincts when something feels wrong. The money is never worth your life, and the cargo is never worth your soul. Sometimes the most dangerous freight is the kind you never suspect, delivered to places that should not exist, for purposes that defy human decency. The highway connects more than just cities and states. Sometimes it connects the living world to something much darker,